More, I'm joined in studio now by international affairs analyst Dan Perry, who's also the former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press, as well as our I24 News senior Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us on the rundown this evening. Now, these next 24 hours, we should hear some major decisions coming from the Israeli security cabinet. But until then, nothing is final until it is final. But Dan, if the United States does support a move like this, at least publicly, or Donald Trump is kind of walking a fine line right now, it seems, but then does it matter if other Western powers, the United Nations, if they condemn Israel for something like this, but the U.S. still backs Israel, does it really have any other weight then?
I would say the opposition of the entire world is completely immaterial. Israel still depends on various countries for many things, including military supplies and trade in particular. Obviously applies mostly to Europe, but that shouldn't be the main question. And just because Trump allows something to happen doesn't mean that thing should happen. There is significant opposition in Israel by the public and by the military and by the entire security establishment. I imagine I could go on and on. Other parts of the country that would oppose this because it is very problematic for Israel to embroil itself in the occupation of the entire Strip, which means the management of 2 million people, half of whom are youth under 17 who are mostly radicalized, hate Israel, impoverished and desperate, angry, and can be turned into terrorists for 10 shekels apiece, many of them. This promises to be a sustained and ugly insurgency that could cost many, many more lives. And it's not difficult to envision that at some point they will execute the hostages. Or they would be killed, even perhaps by the Israeli army unwittingly. It stands very much in opposition to the desire of most of the public to be done with this war. I have heard it speculated that it may be some kind of ruse, maybe a bluff to pressure Hamas, maybe, but I'm not sure you can pressure an organization that feeds off death and destruction and probably intended from the very beginning to draw Israel into a trap of occupying Gaza because they don't want a two-state solution. They want one state in which Israel faces internal difficulty, and if Gaza is truly occupied permanently, it becomes an internal Israeli problem. It may not be, though. I think we'll see tomorrow what the decision is. I imagine it'll be somewhat open-ended, giving a lot of latitude to decision makers, and it could end up being nothing more than a move further in to encircle Deir al-Balah or Gaza and put pressure on Hamas that way. Even if they approve the ultimate full occupation of the Strip, it doesn't mean they actually have to implement it. There are many diplomatic maneuvers all over the place vis-a-vis many countries. It is very important that last week, the Arab world, basically, including Qatar, called on Hamas to disarm and to leave. There are various things happening to put pressure on Hamas. And I don't fully rule out that some version of greater Israeli military pressure could factor into that in a way that might potentially work.
Well, based off of what Dan just said, the fact that some are seeing that this could be some sort of a ruse, the fact that this is all being reported so openly, Ariel, could it be one last-minute effort to push Hamas to an all-for-nothing negotiating deal, or we're going to come all in and take the Gaza Strip? I mean, what is Hamas stating so far about these plans that have been leaked in the open?
Yeah, I agree with Dan. For Hamas, they are not scared of such a scenario. In fact, it's possible that Israel is playing into a trap laid by Hamas, because ultimately one of their main goals, primary objectives in launching the October 7 attacks is international isolation of Israel and the continuation or perhaps even exacerbation of the current situation of the humanitarian crisis inside the Gaza Strip will further play into their hands. Just look at their statement today. They say that they highly value and appreciate the global movement against Israel, calling for escalation in protests in coming days in all cities, capitals, and squares across the world. So they're seeing this PR campaign, this isolation of Israel in terms of the public opinion, and they're rubbing their hands together. And so ultimately, they are not shying away from the prospect of a multi-year insurgency, but ultimately numerous Israeli military officials in the present and the past have been saying, that to completely destroy Hamas and remove them from power, in the absence of an alternative, we must note, could take years. The hostages do not have that time. We are seeing this in the videos brought forth by Hamas, by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So is this a bluff by Israel? I think Hamas has no problem calling Israel on their bluff and allowing them to go through, because ultimately I think this does play into the hands of Hamas.
And it is certainly raising some serious concerns for the Israeli public and the family members of the remaining 50 hostages. How exactly do we know what's really happening inside Gaza? Foreign journalists, they're not allowed in unless they're embedded with the IDF, leaving much of the world to rely on local Gazan reporters. But under Hamas rule, that often means reports are filtered through Hamas propaganda. Now, a major German newspaper is exposing what it calls a coordinated effort by Hamas to stage scenes of suffering, manipulating global opinion through this powerful imagery. Now, according to the investigation, some viral photos of Gazans holding empty pots or begging for food, they were actually staged, with photographers directing people where and how to pose. Now, this is not to say that the suffering in Gaza is not real, but the images that we see, they don't always reflect the reality. And yet many news outlets, they publish them without context, treating propaganda as fact. I want to come back here in studio now to Dan Perry. So much of the imagery, it seems, is being staged or manipulated inside Gaza, but how can newsrooms responsibly separate this fact from fiction, especially when independent journalists are not allowed inside Gaza? What more can actually be done?
Well, you answered your own question. If there's no journalists inside Gaza who aren't Palestinians who are reasonably afraid of Hamas, and who knows, might be faking photos or staging whatever circumstances, there's not much you can do. You can apply your judgment. You can make sure that the local Palestinians that you hire have the highest ethical values as a journalist. And so all the obvious things. But, you know, I was the editor of Associated Press in the Middle East. That includes Gaza and many other police states. Can I honestly swear to you that there was no case of any photo being staged? It would be a lie. Of course you can't. But we did make every conceivable effort to avoid that happening, and that more or less begins and sometimes ends with the quality of the local people that you work for. I can attest that the local people that we had working in print and photos and TV in Gaza were the best that there can be. And by and large, I consider them to be very heroic, specifically and precisely because in working for a foreign outfit where many of their bosses were Jews and Israelis, they were exposed to a lot of anger of their fellow Gazans. Is it still the case now, when the place is a ruin and the hatred for Israel's maximal? I'm almost happy I'm no longer in that situation, because it really, really is very difficult. On the other hand, if Israel were to let in, foreign correspondents, who knows what would happen to them, because the place is extremely dangerous. So Israel's not wrong in saying that if we did that and someone were killed, we'd be blamed also. Maybe they should end the war. Basically, I mean, this is such a messy situation that the stronger party is going to get all kinds of blame. But to your question about journalism, there's a point where you just have to realize that you live in the real world. What about, as we were talking before, in the United States, the reporters who cover the mafia, the waste disposal industry. Can their editors be sure that they're not afraid of the subjects of their coverage? Can we absolutely be sure that there isn't implied censorship when you're covering the mafia or criminals in general? Of course not. And reporters in Gaza are covering the mafia. And there's this false idea being vehiculated that there is Hamas censorship. There basically is not. What there is you're dealing with the mafia, and they're killers. And does that never factor into the decisions to maybe cover or not cover something? The reader can, the viewer can judge for his or herself.
Well, Ariel, you've been, along with the IDF, in one of these embeds into the Gaza Strip. The IDF also come under fire for 22 months, not allowing independent journalists inside, only with these embeds. But what is the IDF's rationale here for protecting journalists, but also protecting freedom of speech?
Right. So ultimately, and you and Dan both touched on it, the core reason is to protect the journalists. The IDF does not want to put foreign journalists in a situation where they could either be kidnapped by Hamas, threatened by Hamas, or caught in the crosshairs, in the crossfire between IDF troops and Hamas operatives. Now, I respectfully disagree with Dan saying that there is no censorship inside the Gaza Strip.
Formal?
There are testimonies of AP whistleblowers, Maddie Friedman, saying
yeah. A lot of that is nonsense.
All right.
Look, as I say, it's implied. It's thuggery.
So he voices a scenario where there was a Gazan reporter who was contacted by Hamas after he reported a story, and they basically had to remove the story, and from that moment on could not show images of Hamas militants. You won't see dead Hamas bodies taken on AP websites or any other large
Well, he's
media.
embellished the story since then. His story originally was that in the 2008-9 war, when I wasn't here, by the way, I was in London, there was such a picture, and then the reporter called back and said, look, please take that picture off. And the implication was that the photographer was threatened. I don't know if that's true or not, but the idea that we can never show dead militants is false, because
we do often see many of these mainstream medias, including the Associated Press, filter their coverage of what's happening in Gaza, and often it does end up putting more of a pro-Hamas light on the situation.
This needs to be said. For the duration that I was there, which is 2011 to 2018, I can assure you that we showed dead militants. I can also assure you that we showed rockets being fired from civilian areas. All these claims are basically lies. But is it not true that if we showed it all the time, eventually Hamas might have got upset and maybe complained, and someone might have become scared? I can't promise you that. But within the bounds of what is reasonable when you're covering the mafia, we showed all these things. So these claims that they could never again show a dead militant are patently false, and other claims, by the way, are even more ridiculously false, made from that particular quarter.
All right, so putting this whistleblower aside, there are numerous other photojournalists who have worked inside the Gaza Strip who say that there is the constant fear by Hamas, whether it's active censorship or tacit censorship. Ultimately, everything has to go through them in one way or another. If not in their approval, they will follow up afterwards. And at the end of the day, Israel does not want to put itself in a situation where it is responsible for the safety of these foreign journalists when they're not. This isn't your usual combat zone. This is an area that is controlled by a genocidal terrorist organization that has, in the past, kidnapped journalists, has tortured journalists, and Israel does not want, and in my opinion, shouldn't have this on its own responsibility.
Two things I want to say. One, the Gaza situation is a little bit of a singularity, but at the end of the day, as regards this particular issue, there are many other countries that the world's media tries to cover where the coverage is not free. For example, North Korea, AP opened up a bureau there. I mean, it's not free. There are various types of tacit and not tacit restrictions and limitations on what you can do. We also had a bureau in Iran. Many international media have bureaus in Cuba and elsewhere, and the reality is that none of these places are free. Should the media always append to every story? By the way, you should know the environment there is not free. I couldn't tell you one other very important thing. In this situation where Israel prevents foreigners from going in and has a legitimate beef against the situation psychologically even of the locals, Israel should be trying very, very hard to explain itself, what it's doing, what happened, what the purpose was. And this it hasn't been doing categorically. It's projecting indifference to the ruination of its image because of all this destruction in Gaza is met with outrage in the West and silence in Israel.
A very interesting discussion when it comes to the importance of journalism right now. Gentlemen, thank you very much. History was made in Jerusalem this week as the IDF's first ultra-Orthodox combat brigade completed basic training. The Hasmonean Brigade marched 55 kilometers to the Western Wall, a powerful symbol of faith and defense, marking a significant step in Israel's efforts to integrate Haredi soldiers into the military. If this can be used in a broader realm of actually integrating this portion of the population into Israeli society in a broader aspect, do you think that this could be a model not just in the military, but in other aspects as well.
I'm not sure this new brigade is necessarily a model because it is separate from the rest of the army. It's a way to get a few Haredim into the army, but they remain very much distinct and not integrated, and they have this outrageous compromise of a rabbinical authority diluting the authority of the military commanders in the brigade. That can't be a model for anything. Moreover, we shouldn't be distracted by shiny things. This is one brigade. The reality is that over the past year or so, tens of thousands of conscription notices have been sent to Haredi youth, and about, I think, 1,000 were not ignored. The rest were ignored. What would happen to your average secular or traditional Israeli or religious non-Haredi Israeli if they ignored the call-up orders? What would have happened to my daughters? They would all be in jail. This makes a mockery of equality under the law. It cannot continue, but it's very complicated because even though the heart says, absolutely, recruit them all, and if they refuse, throw them in jail. Yeah, they go cold turkey and shock therapy. The reality is that if they were really integrated into all military units, then every single military unit would have conflict internally because they would start, if their preferences are respected, they would start complaining about women's dress and about the level of kosherness of the food and everything else. This is Israel's major issue. It's a bigger problem than any dispute with any group of Arabs. The Haredim are 16% of the Jewish population right now. They very much live off subsidies, direct and indirect. They refuse to teach their boys in high school math, English, and science. They insist on long periods into adulthood, sometimes all of life, in seminaries where they want to receive a tuition, not pay a tuition. The participation in the labor force for men is very low, and for high-level work, extremely low. When you talk to Haredim about this and ask them how it can continue, they'll point to exceptions. Here's a Haredi high-tech guy, and here's a woman doctor, and here's this brigade. But the truth is, partly on the wing of child allowances, Haredi families are having 7 kids apiece. So this 1/6 of the Jewish population doubles itself as a proportion every generation. In 20 years, it's a third. And in 40 years, they're a majority. Now, how is that going to work for a modern country? If you're really going to respect their lifestyle and their preferences and the way they want gender separation and the way they sanctify above all else men studying Torah all their lives and the way they refuse to serve in the army, which, by the way, is doubly immoral, considering that the Haredim are the most nationalistic, anti-Arab group. Every poll shows this. In Israeli society, they're solidly part of the right-wing government that is inclined to prolong wars, not shorten them. And they refuse to serve in these wars. It's an abomination. Maimonides is probably rolling in his grave because that great Jewish scholar basically stood for opposing the idea that religion should be an excuse to not participate in modern life and should be a career. Religion should be a part of everyday life, integrated into modern life, not the creation of this ghetto that really is poised to destroy the modern state of Israel unless something happens quick.
Posing some interesting thoughts as always. Dan Perry, great to have you with us. Thank you.